administration and the public. We'll now call the Building and Lands Committee meeting to order. We'll take attendance. Councilman Miller.
Present.
Mr. Van Turen.
Present.
Mr. Bukabach.
Here.
Mr. Goodell.
Here.
Mr. Winarski.
Here.
Mrs. Lasso.
Here.
And the chair is present. And President Dietrich is not present this evening, but has a letter on file. Mr. Bukabach.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mr. Dietrich with his letter on file.
And we have a second.
Second.
Mr. Goodell, thank you. And we have before us tonight A-16-02, which is the approval of subdividers agreement and record plat for North Point Estates Subdivision 4. What you have before you in relation to copies is the minutes from the City of Amherst Planning Commission meeting held December 16th, at which our mayor and our safety service director were present, as well as Mr. Tom Oster, who's here this evening as well in the audience. We have the Bramhall Engineering Surveying Company letter of approval for the action that's being taken. Mr. Mayor, would you like to summarize what exactly this is? Or
I can, and then I could yield the floor to Mr. Oster if he likes. But this went through Planning Commission. They had some changes. They went from a larger number of lots, 105 lots, and down to 83 lots. I think is the plan. The lots are a little bit bigger. I think there's somewhere around 66 lots left now. Down, and then that's down to 44 available is what I think has been reconfigured, somewhere around there. The biggest thing that's really good for the city, we've asked that the utilities, all the utility improvements are finished before the building begins, so all the utilities will be adjusted to the larger size lots. We suggested that this is approved by council at the Planning Commission meeting, so I would yield the floor to Mr. Oster if he's had anything he would like to add to that.
No, I think that's why you're the mayor, so you did a great job. I don't know if we can request it by emergency.
Tom,
or
can
not.
you go up to the
Yes.
podium, please? And can you state your name and address, please?
Tom Oster, Amherst Land Holding Company LLC, 6150 Park Square Drive, Lorraine, Ohio, 44053. Yes, we would request, if possible, to get this approved by emergency. It's not an emergency. We're just excited about moving the utilities ASAP and start selling some of the bigger homes in there. We did reduce it from 105 down to 83, so there are 65 home sites left, which we're reducing to 43 larger home sites. So we think it makes a nice transition. We have the smaller homes in front as you enter the community, the larger homes on the traditional R1 lots, on the 90-foot lots in the back, and this will be the chunk in between. So we're looking to build homes in the 2 to 250 range, which will kind of complement and what we're doing there. And the market demand is not for the smaller homes on the smaller lots. So we just think we can finish up quicker and be on your hair a lot sooner.
Questions from council? Councilman Winarski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a quick question, starting with the cover page. It says approval of the subdividers agreement and record plat for North Point Estates Subdivision 4. Are we actually voting on amendment number 2? The subdividers agreement was already reconciled a while back. I believe we're voting on amendment 2. Am I misunderstanding?
I've already kind of done a preliminary draft of the ordinance, and I do make reference to the second amendment of the subdividers agreement.
Okay, so
So
we're
to
covered.
be more specific, I think it's right to be more specific.
Okay. Thank you. If we go to page 3, item number 5, impact fees. In exchange for passing this, we're getting some impact fees to the city. I guess I'd ask, what are we giving in exchange for these impact fees?
that was in the original.
Councilman Warsey, can you specify where I can find this?
Page 3, item number 5.
Thank you.
Those impact fees are standard, are improved by ordinance.
Yeah, that has not been modified.
That's not been modified for this agreement, that was in the original one.
Okay.
So, you know, the water impact fee would be what we would think that number, so we can use them monies to improve our water system, you know, same
Right.
with the sewer, same with the park.
Okay, and this is different than a tapping fee, I guess?
Yes, these
Okay.
are impact fees that they pay per lot, and there's certain places in the budget where those fees go, and we use those for improvements.
Okay, that's great, okay. In exchange for this, for example, the sewer impact fee or the water impact fee, which has become a real hot button issue, I guess. The state just, or the Turnpike just gave us $250,000 for their impact on water. There's also, I believe it's $35 a quarter, a lot of cities are charging per house for water impact. That's to move water
This is
off their
different,
land.
that's stormwater, this is your drinking water,
Okay,
so two different. Your water impact fee would be for your drinking system.
okay, so this is for the delivery, not the removal of
Exactly.
runoff. Okay, all right. So I guess, well, that answers that question. I just wanted to know what we're giving in exchange for all these fees that you're kindly offering us.
Is that still a question? I didn't answer that the first time. Those fees will go into an account where we can improve our water delivery system.
Right.
Then those fees will go into a sewer so we can improve. Because they're impacting those systems, sometimes you might have to upgrade the sizes or.
Okay, and these don't prohibit our ability in the future, say we need to make grander improvements and a future council needs to assess $35 a quarter to a house? This does not
Nothing.
impact our ability, or our future council's ability to do that?
No.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Winarski. Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had Bram Hall go ahead and look at the catch basin, and I believe that they have signed off on the fact that there's not going to be any negative results of changing the lot size and the way it's graded for these new homes. So my understanding is this is actually put in a positive way that'll maybe even reduce a little bit of that water drainage into that retention basin. So I'm for this. I live in that neighborhood, and I'm thankful that you are transitioning between the two, and we're hoping that you'll continue to do well by the neighbors.
Yeah, and when we first installed all the infrastructure, it was installed for 140 units. The first amendment went from 140 down to 105. Now we're going from 105 down to 83. So we're probably oversized on the stormwater.
Which is not a bad thing, because a lot of that excess water has been eroding the rest of the creek all the way through the city as it leads towards Beaver. And so I think this is a good thing. That's it.
So,
Mr. Miller, have you talked to the other people in your subdivision? Do they pretty much concur with your assessment that this is a pretty good idea to do this, the people you've talked to?
Well, there's a positive effect, and that is that we're going to increase the value of homes going into that neighborhood. So of course, by improving the size and value of the homes, the rest of the homes will continue to maintain their value in the back area, which would be North Point, East Point, Compass. So that's a positive. I think the only negative the homeowners association may have is instead of 140 units paying for the homeowners association and their fees, it's now going to be 83. So we are going to see a substantial increase probably over the next 4 or 5 years in fees, homeowners fees, to take care of the clubhouse and those public areas.
But you say the benefits primarily outweigh the costs.
I believe so, and I think that Mr. Oster has made a generous agreement with the homeowners association to give a one-time, between him and KHOP, to give a one-time down payment installment for capital improvements of $36,000 to the homeowners association. So I think if they use it right, the homeowners association use it right, they should be able to gradually work into that lower number of units. I like it. I think it's going to be good for Amherst, good for the neighborhood. And so I just want to make sure that we understood that retention pond, I like the fact it's over to the already size, because it's going to stop that water from rising as quickly and heading down through Westchester and the rest of the area past Shoup. So that's a good thing.
I appreciate your willingness to comment on that, and actually, just because of your firsthand knowledge of the area. That's all my questions.
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to.
Yeah, and we actually met with the homeowners association board and all the members prior to implementing the plan. And just to clarify, in addition to the 83 lots that we have in this chunk of North Point, there's also the 47 larger homes which are above and beyond. So those are also contributing to the HOA as well.
Once they get built, right?
Well, those are already built, the original 47.
Oh, I think you're saying the total number would add 40.
47 plus 83.
Thank you, Mr. Webster.
With that, I move to take this to the floor of council for the emergency.
Mr. Ventura? Thank you for your time, Mr. Oster. Voice vote?
No, he needs.
Oh, Mr. Buchbach.
Thank you. I had a couple quick questions, not necessarily related totally to this query, but since it was mentioned, follow up to Mr. Winarski's question regarding the impact fees. Impact fees, if they are set by the current ordinance, and this is an agreement with the ordinance, why we have them outlined in the agreement? Oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't, I was looking for, that's great if you can answer this.
Well, I think it's appropriate that it should be part of the agreement between the subdivider and the city. I mean, it contractually binds him to pay
Okay.
those impact fees in addition to having an obligation under the ordinance. would be
Very
my
good.
response.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, Mr. Oster, you're actually looking for, obviously, quick resolution. Everybody knows I'm not a big fan of emergency. Emergency and passing on the first reading are two different things. Is there a target date that you need to have this done in order to get started?
No.
Okay. How does the rezoning affect, when you would be able to put in utilities or anything like that?
We already have 3 bids in for the utilities, so we're ready to have a pre-construction meeting and move forward, as soon as we have our approval. My only urgency is a biased urgency, and that is I'm paying $3,000 a month for real estate taxes on the unsold lots. So I'm just trying to move it as quick as I can, but
Okay, so is the intention of your motion was to suspend council rules of first meeting and emergency, or was the intention to 3 readings and emergency?
Well, I guess if you would like to just suspend rules instead of have the emergency, I'm comfortable with that. I'd have to ask Mr. Van Truen if he's willing to withdraw his second.
Certainly.
Yeah, with the understanding.
Okay.
I can do that. And what you do is you withdraw the emergency, and we'll just have an understanding that there will be suspension of rules if council concurs.
If everybody else is comfortable with suspension of rules.
On,
yes.
and on the council floor.
Okay, thank you. That was all I had.
Joe has a comment.
Would you prefer a voice vote then, or?
Well, no, Joe has a comment.
Oh, Joe, Mr. Miller, I'm sorry.
Well, now that we have an amended motion, and that is to suspend council rules and pass on emergency, then I'll second that, to send to the floor, and that,
Sorry.
Well, we don't.
It's already seconded.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. That was just clarification on Mr. Miller.
instead of the emergency, we're going to be suspending council rules.
Yeah, but that's not part of
But
the
we don't do that
motion.
here.
That's not.
That's right, that's next week.
Yeah, that's not part of
Okay,
the
right.
rules. That's just the.
that's how you're gonna, is that how we're gonna send it to the
Right.
floor?
Yeah,
You just send it to the floor. We
There
don't
won't be any
suspend rules.
so there's just a motion to send it to the floor of council right now.
Yeah,
Without emergency?
that's correct.
Correct.
And the second is.
The second was Mr. Ventura. All right, Mr. Miller,
That'll be it, thank you. Are
any
you
other
calling a vote?
questions, any other comments? We'll take a voice vote then. All in favor of taking this to the floor of council next week? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Thank you very much. This concludes our meeting. for Buildings and Lands, Mr. Van Turen.
Move to adjourn.
And Mr. Miller.
Second, please.
Thank you very much. We're adjourning at 7:15.
You know how that, you know how that goes, you know, so you say something here, and it goes around the room, and it comes back something different. I wouldn't have had to pass on to Mr. Miller, on the city council rules committee.
Yep. You would sign, as soon as we pass it, you can sign it that night, and then there's 30 days before it goes.
No, I think that was good.
If it's with emergency, then
You
as
get
soon as you
50
sign it,
people
it's
showing
gonna be.
Probably needs to go through your
But
review.
I always thought
We'll see what happens.
with the issue, so that it's there on the agenda that day, so we know.
I just wanted clarification, if it was gonna be readings or emergency.
Because it always
Mr.
comes
Miller?
on our agenda. Suspended.
Mr. Miller?
It's an emergency.
So, that, that.
You know that 10-pack of reading glasses you mentioned? I might just put one on there.
Probably leave a few behind for others.
With the disinfectant spray.
I'd like to call to order the ordinance committee on January 18, 2016 at 7:18. We're using the same attendance as the last committee meeting, noting that President Dietrich is not in attendance. All other members of the administration are. With that, we have a -16-01, an ordinance to approve current replacement pages to the Amherst codified ordinance and declaring an emergency. So,
I move that we send a 1601 to the floor of council with the emergency.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor by Ms. Masook and a second by Mr. Goodell to take to the floor A-1601, replacing, the annual replacing of codified ordinance pages. Yes.
Just,
Mr.
I guess,
Konarski.
it's more comment than anything else, because I made a few phone calls today asking, and I'll back up a little bit. If you go to page 1, halfway down, it starts with the number of items that are added to bring us up to current state law. I counted 22 of them. But I couldn't find the language anywhere. So to answer that question to the people that I called today, it's all right here. So we got a little light reading ahead of us before the next meeting.
Yes.
Point being, I found the answer to my question for those of you that
Sitting
I
right on the
bugged today.
desk, waiting for it to arrive.
Yep, that's all. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Bukovac.
Along those lines, clarification, the items listed in the, I've got more to review based on his comments than what's listed on that list. We have items from 192 statutory. Has that also been changed, included? Mr., I yield the floor.
If I might,
Mr. Carlson?
the ones that are referred to in the ordinance relate to the traffic code and the fire prevention code and those kinds of codes. Those have not been enacted yet by the city of Amherst, and what you're being asked to do is to amend those sections to conform with Ohio law. The sections in, for example, relating to income tax, you've already passed those matters, so we don't have to.
Understood. So what's listed is new, we have not seen
Right,
yet
that's-
before.
That's exactly right.
Great, thank you. None of my questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bukovac. Thank you, Mr. Carlson. All right, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and take a vote. We have a motion on the floor in a second. We'll take a vote. All those in favor of approving the current replacement pages in the Amherst Codified Ordinance, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. And we look like we're going 7-0. That's all we have for that. I need a move to adjourn. Ms. Russo?
I'm moved to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. We have a motion. Mr. Winarski?
I'll second.
We have a motion on the floor and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We are adjourned at,
Just a question, why are we adjourning? Don't we have 2 items?
Next one.
my apologies.
What about this?
Hey,
Both ordinance.
let's go ahead and jump right back into the next ordinance. Why are we here?
Oh, at least we
I
didn't vote.
withdraw my second.
You can withdraw your second. Absolutely.
I figured maybe we weren't going to discuss it.
You were hoping?
I thought it was
I'd
good
be
polling.
reacting if you knew.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
want to look
I
like
did.
an idiot. Okay. So used to jumping from one to the other. So we're still,
First meeting.
the
I got.
committee, welcome back. First committee back. So we're still open for the ordinance committee. The second item is A16-03. This has come in many forms. This is the attempt to bring a portion of the sign ordinance back to council committee and hopefully bring it to the actual council floor to get a very large, cumbersome ordinance cleaned up and to code. So if you would, Mr. Carlson, you and I and Mr. McCartney had met on this. Could you give a summary from a legal review?
Yes, I think it was council's pleasure that we try to break these amendments into 3 parts. The first part would address the issue of electronic changeable message signs. The next part would address the issue of temporary signs. And the third part would address possible changes to the sign ordinance as it relates to the downtown historic district. Also, if we get that far, there has to be kind of a wholesale kind of numbering and other changes to the ordinance to kind of package it all together as a coherent whole. But what we're proposing today are just the changes to the ordinance as they relate to electronic changeable message signs. And I've attempted to kind of give you a brief description of those sections that we're amending and the reason we're amending them. So I've included this explanation of proposed changes to the sign ordinance. And you'll see that there are a number of changes to definitions, some of which relate to electronic changeable message signs, but not all of them. For example, I think Dave McCartney wanted there to be a new definition for building official that hadn't been in there previously. And also painted window sign, right-of-way sandwich board sign, special event sign. Rather than kind of re-amending this section, 114902, later on, I'm suggesting we include those new definitions into that section. There's a slight change to the definition of temporary sign, and we're proposing that the definitions be alphabetized. So that's kind of what we're doing in 114902. And I've included in my package the existing language of the ordinance and the proposed changes that appear in a red line format or sometimes a blue line format. So you can compare what we're proposing to what exists currently. So I would say that we're not making drastic changes to the definition section, just some things that need to be tweaked. Under 114903, this is a significant change, although a very small one in terms of the wording of the ordinance. What we've done in that section, or proposing to do in that section, is include electronic changeable message signs as a permitted use in C1, C2, C3, and the I1 zoning districts. Before, they were prohibited because they fell within what we considered the definition of a flashing or illuminated sign. So this kind of goes to the heart of what we're trying to do here, that we would have these requests, particularly from commercial businesses, to install these signs, and yet they weren't a permitted sign. So what we were having to do in each case was grant a variance. And the variance would often relate to the fact that it was in a commercial area. So what we're saying now is, well, let's just permit them in those areas with certain restrictions that are developed in these sections. So it's a real short change, but an important one. 114910, signs not permitted in any district. Again, this is where we used to have the prohibition of the general prohibition of signs that emitted a flashing or moving light source. Now we're making specific exception to allow for electronic changeable message signs in those districts. Finally, in 114911, what we've done is include a number of kind of substantive restrictions and on electronic changeable message signs themselves, so that we have, well, you'll see them. Primarily, those are Dave's suggestions based upon his review of other ordinances, but they relate to the periods of movement, the fact that they have to demonstrate to the city at the time they seek the approval that they're not too bright, that they can be changed, and so on and so forth. Those proposed changes are shown on page 13 of the handout that relates to signs. And they're in the kind of purple color.
Mr. Carlson, does that conclude your
Yes,
response?
I'm happy to.
All right, well, Ms. Wasoka and Mr. Bukovac.
How urgent is it that we get this from either Mr. Carlson or Mr. Miller's point of view, or even the mayor? How urgent is this that we get this done right away? I'm just wondering if we ought to table it to give us at least till the next meeting time to take a look at this. I'm not sure it's all that extensive, but what's your thought? How much urgency is there?
Well, just I can speak personally for myself, not for the mayor or for Mr. Carlson, but these changes are, although very summative and inclusive of Mr. Winarski's, some of your ideas we took into effect as well. We're pretty happy that you pointed some good things out. But I think that this is ready to go. I know that the Board of Zoning Appeals is getting more often than not requests brought to them. And I think the sooner we get this to the floor, the sooner we get it passed, the better. I don't think it has to go less than 3 readings, but I really believe it needs to get on the floor.
Okay, so you think that that this coming week we should make a concerted effort between now and the next meeting to review this. Okay, with that, I move to take this to the floor of council. Let's see, does this just to the floor of council?
We're going to get a second. I saw Mr. Bukovac's comments and questions on that, but I have a second, Mr. Goodell.
Yes, second.
Mr. Goodell seconds Ms. Wasoka's motion, and Mr. Bukovac, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Carlson, first I'd like to say thank you for actually giving us page numbers.
Well,
Cross-outs
I can't take
and
credit for that.
definitions.
It was Mr. Miller that said, Frank, do you think it would be better with page numbers? Of course, he was right.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, for doing that. So, second question. I'm assuming, and I should never assume, the page 1 and page 2 will not be part of the ordinance. This is just
No,
outlines for the
that is correct.
document in front of us.
That's correct.
Next question is procedurally. You mentioned basically 4 different ordinances coming in front of us. 3 breakdowns, but then you also mentioned a summarizing ordinance that was going to rearrange some numbers.
That would be part of the third one.
Okay.
I think.
So from a procedural standpoint, what is the goal here? We're going to work this first one through all the way before we bring another introduction, or are we gonna introduce them and just work them through council? I mean, I guess, you know, with making changes to definitions in one ordinance, we'd almost have to get that all the way through, don't we, before we actually make other changes in?
I don't think that that's the case. I think that the process that we envision is that we would go through with this part of it. Even if it means having definitions that may not pertain to any specific language.
Understood.
I don't think it can hurt to have them in there.
Understood. So I guess procedurally, are we doing this all one time? Or, I'm sorry, are we doing this electronic sign messaging first?
Well, right now, what
Then,
we're,
when we're all done, then you're gonna come back with the other two.
what-
Yes. I'm sorry, Joe.
all right, what I've planned as chair of the committee is to bring forth the second piece and offer it for the next committee meeting.
Okay.
Because this one will be bumped out, and it'll be on the floor next week.
Okay, that's what. that's the
Following
question I
week,
was
we'll have
looking for. Okay.
committee, we'll have another sign committee, we'll have the second piece ready to go. If that one gets pushed out, then we'll go ahead and put the third one in. But until they move from committee to floor, we're not gonna bring the next one in.
I think that's great. I actually think that's a good idea. I just hope that we as a group we don't get in such a constant turmoil that brought us to separating into three to begin with. Yes.
I guess I have a question. Let's say that you take this part to council, and council decides that, well, we're gonna go ahead with this on 3 readings. Is it going to make it more complicated if we're starting in the midst of that process?
That was my question.
Proposing a second amendment?
Well, my thoughts
I'm
are,
fine with it.
if we go 3 readings on the first one, and then we put the second one on the floor, while it's going in its second reading, and then we put the third one on while it's going to the first, on that last meeting, general meeting, we could technically get all 3 passed at the same time so that they get enacted. So the third one will be, it'll be on its 3rd reading, the second will be passed on the 2nd reading, and the first will be suspended rules will be passed on the 1st reading. And so we'll suspend rules for first and second
Well,
readings.
let's see how.
That would be the real nice pie in the sky goal for this signage ordinance.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bukovac. Very good questions, and I think that's going to help us to understand how we want to move forward. Mr. Janik?
Yeah, I have a question, Frank. On page 5, under the excessive brightness definition, on 1149.02,
Yes.
should we include that on 1149.11 on page 13, under G2, where we're talking about the illumination?
Well, as I recall, and there is a prohibition against excessive brightness in that section. Let me just make sure.
I like what you've done with the definitions, but I'm wondering if that's a place where we need to put a definition in relating to the brightness right after G2
Would it be better to put it in quotes so you know to go back to the
to the definition.
definition?
Or reference the definition document.
Well, okay, yeah, if you look at G2 under 1149.11, no ECM sign shall be manufactured or installed to create situations of excessive brightness.
Which is.
I could certainly add, C definition or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to do that. The whole point of definitions in the section is to define the terms as defined in definitions in 1149, period, going forward. So 1149.11, the definitions in 1149.02 would apply. So excessive brightness in 1149.02.10 would be as defined in 1149.11 G. So.
Oh, so we would put that in the definition.
No.
I think it's covering.
Because we do that on some of the other documents, we refer to the definition.
I guess I would leave it up to Francis to craft it. It's presumed whenever you have a definitions section in an ordinance, it applies to the provision that you're applying it to. So
Right.
1149, those definitions would be.
But to the members of the general public, if they're referring to 1149-11 only, I would think that they need to be referred to
Okay.
the definition
Sure.
here, so at least they would be able to see what excessive brightness means. But if that's where the
We should
general
be-
public
then we should-
started.
Then we should be consistent throughout that.
That's, and I noticed that in a couple other pages that we referred to the definitions,
Right.
so.
Yes, the definition section, as Law Director has pointed out, applies to all of the subsequent provisions in the chapter. I don't think it's necessary to say it. If the council feels that it makes them more comfortable to have it there, then certainly we can do it that way.
Do you want it, Mr. Janica, Mr. Carlson, let me put it here. If you go on to page 6, would you want it in the definition section like it is on 26? Service station, see section 114908A5. Is that what you'd like to see under
No.
excessive brightness? I mean, is
No.
that, well, that's when you, I'm trying to figure out what you're looking for.
Right, well, I mean, that's an example of where you do that on the definition page, but then there's a couple other pages in here where you're referring back to the definition page itself.
I mean, I think we can leave it up to our legal minds here to decide what's the best way to wordsmith this.
Let me give you an example. I don't know if this is helpful. One of the changes that was made in the Ohio Revised Code that you were taking to council with the packet is, let's say, a new definition of what it means to act knowingly or purposefully for the purposes of a criminal statute. So the statute might say, no person shall knowingly hit another person on the head with a bat. You know, they don't then say, see definition of
Knowingly.
But I get what you're saying, you know.
Because we've defined what
Because you've
excessive
defined,
brightness is.
yes, that's right, yeah.
So,
Whether we want to footnote it or whether we want to state it in the
Right,
definition.
right.
I think Mr. Janik just wants consistency.
Right.
Right, okay.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Is there anything else?
Go.
Mr. Bukovac?
On Mr. Janik's thing, just lately, I think I understand. I think you read that sentence, it doesn't really, if you just read it by itself, it doesn't say, is there a definition for excessive brightness? What is that? By quoting it, it says there must be a definition somewhere.
You know, one thing we could think about doing is we could put excessive brightness in caps, capital E, capital B. And then that kind of really, I think, puts somebody on notice that you're talking about something that's been formally defined.
Agreed.
No, that's excellent. I like that.
My
Thank you.
second comment or question is, who's measuring excessive brightness?
Excessive brightness is defined in a
It's defined.
empirical way. So that, and it's through Mr. Winarski's efforts that we have that in there.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's, what would happen is that the sign manufacturer would come before the building department, and they would have this diagram, and Mr. Winarski knows these things better than I do, that shows kind of the way the light, you know, dissipates from the point source. And it gives numbers at certain distances. So what the city's going to be doing is it's going to be looking at that diagram and comparing it to where the boundary lines are of the nearest residential lot, for example, and it's going to make sure that it's not excessively bright under that definition in a numerical way.
Okay.
So,
So I guess let me put a scenario out there. See a sign goes in, the sign's been checked for excessive brightness before manufacture, diagram's all checked in, they install the sign. 3 months goes later, I swear that sign's brighter than it used to be. Who's gonna check that brightness? Is that gonna be the responsibility of the business owner?
yes, it is.
Okay, so the city would then go to the owner of the sign, whether it's business owner or whatever,
Yes.
and say, we have a complaint, you have to verify that this has been, the brightness has not been adjusted, does not exceed the ordinance.
Yes, right. But if you look at, for example, on 1149-11G3, it talks about prior to the issuance of a permit, they have to demonstrate their capability of complying with the brightness provisions. Any post-installation testing required will be at the full expense of the sign company and the owner. So
Okay,
if there
great.
is
Thank you.
a complaint filed, they're going to have to prove it on their dime that they're compliant.
All right, I didn't see that line item, thank you. Those are
Excellent
my
question.
questions.
Oh, Mr. Ramsey.
Just, I guess, some pretty legal advice. I would strongly recommend following the advice of Mr. Pecora and not cause additional attention to the term excessive brightness. It's written fine. I think to do so would possibly invite other problems that may not be foreseen right now. When courts, Mr. Carlson can tell you, we litigate cases in front of judges over what words mean, and when the question arises, what does excessive brightness mean, the first place the judge is going to look is in the definition section. If there's a definition of excessive brightness is in there, you can follow it on to the end. So I would just, I think to capitalize things, or I think invites other problems where, I'm one of them, where defense attorneys may, why is it's not capitalized here, but it is here, so this is only the words that we capitalize are definitions under the definition section. And I just foresee problems, so it's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Mr. Janet?
I would disagree. I think the general public, if someone, a business owner, is looking to purchase a sign and starts with that document first, they're going to want to know what excessive brightness means. And without knowing where the definitions page is, they're going to need a reference point. So I'm not talking about the people behind the scenes in terms of the legalistic point of view, which I can see your point, Mr. Ramsey, but I think for the general public and the business owner, they're going to want to see what that means and before they invest the money in a sign.
That definition page will be.
I've got a handle on that. I
Will be
think
there.
that what we need to do then is it would just say that no ECM sign shall be manufactured or installed to create situations of excessive brightness, as that term is defined in section 114902.
That's what I was asking.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson.
You're welcome. Then we don't have capitals, we don't have a special C, blah, blah, blah.
Agreed. Thank you, Mr. Carlson. And Mr. Winarski.
Yeah, where in here, and I see in page 5, section 10, it defines excessive brightness. Is there anywhere else in here that it defines excessive brightness? My goal here is not to impact residents, and I appreciate all the kind words you've had to say, but I'm not seeing it in here. The one section that advised about excessive brightness, while well-intentioned, it only measures the brightness 1 meter from where the sign, so it measures the point of illumination, not where it ends up. At least I don't see.
That's a good
anywhere.
question, because I thought, one of the problems I've had with this is that there have been so many versions of this thing floating around. And there was, in addition to that definition of excessive brightness, something that related to the measurement at the nearest residential lot line. And for whatever reason, I don't see that in here, and it should be in here. So when I do the ordinance, when you see the ordinance coming to you, it will have that in there.
Okay.
I'm just right now trying to cross-reference my notes as well to see if I had something there as well and where we put it.
I'm guessing on page 1, section D, that's where you started. It looks like it's an incomplete thought. That maybe we're going
Page
to
one.
extend it from that point,
Section D.
or I'm just speculating.
Oh, I see what you're saying. The sections residents incorporate regulated ECMs. Oh, yeah, this is just our explanation of what we're changing and why we're changing that. I'll have to look at it as well.
And, you can make them, I think that measurement at the point of brightness is fine within an industrial zone, within a commercial zone, but it's not the appropriate measurement tool when it is impacting a resident across the street from a commercial zone.
I think, didn't we discuss 1 foot away or right next to the sign would be our way to prevent somebody else from saying, well, that's a light source at my property that's not coming from that sign, it's coming from somewhere else. I think that we really were trying to make sure that if we said, hey, at 1 foot away, it's got to be at this illumination, these many lumens is coming from this light source. Because if you move back and you get to somebody's property line, could it be a street light with the moonlight and the sign, and boom, you have more than so many
Sure.
foot candles. And I think that was the concern.
And that concern could be addressed by simply stating not to exceed the existing measurement prior to installation.
There you go.
And I believe that we did do that, in
Yep.
fact, do what he said. And I think it just didn't show up on this revision. I'm
And it
sorry
was
to
the
say about
addition,
that.
right? So
Yeah.
so that's where we
I don't recall hearing that.
did it right next to the sign, but we also left in
Yes,
the
there were
original
two-
measurement.
There were two
Yes.
numerical standards.
I recall
One
that.
that was a foot from the sign and one that was at the nearest residential boundary line, based upon what Mr.
So my understanding then, Mr. Winarski, is Mr. Carlson will bring that piece back in.
Yes.
So when we bring the final piece back onto the floor,
Okay.
if we move this to the floor council, which I'm hoping we will, that will be in there. Agreed, Mr.
Yes.
Carlson? Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Buchbach?
Is there a definition of maximum size an ECM can be? I don't see it.
That's included in other provisions of the sign ordinance. So this would be, for size purposes, this would be treated like any other sign.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's another reason we're trying to get these all on the floor at different stages so we can all vote on.
The
Put 'em
negative
right there.
impact is I don't see that other sign ordinance in front of me, so I have to ask questions
Right.
that
Right.
are included, but I don't see. That's the
And,
negative.
and that's why I thought we could keep it all in, but we broke it up anyway. All right, is there any more questions? I do have a motion on the floor, and let me make sure I get my right packet here. From Ms. Wasilk and a second from Mr. Goodell to take A-1603, amending ordinance 1149 signage to the floor of council. Mr. Carlson, before we do that,
Just point of
Take
clarification,
that vote.
the motion includes the two changes that we've discussed, both Mr. Winarski's comment and Mr. Janik's
I will
comment.
agree to
Am I
that.
correct?
I
in that?
agree.
All right.
I agree.
Thank you.
let me make note of that real quick with changes. All right. So with that, I'd like to take this to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it, 7-0. Mr. Janik,
Motion to adjourn?
Ms. Wasilk,
Second.
and we are going to vote on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
There you go, Chuck. All those opposed? Adjourn, 7:48.
Is that your son, who's the hockey player? Oh. I see his name on our cup.
Of course.
Yeah. Still getting used to it.
I think that's the way you guys got it. Now it's better.
Okay, well then that's good. Let's try to provide you guys with something you can work with. My daughter loves it.
She's there, we always admire her, she helps. I'll tell you who's got it.
He's got something.
Well, I hope.
I've been
We talked 3 weeks later, just say it hasn't changed.
Is this yours? Where's yours?
Is this fine?
Yep.
Where's yours?
Thanks for asking.
Joe's nicely run.
I know my.
See, he started
Your
it
best.
out.
So as you figure out you don't suspend council rules of
Keep it
committee,
real small. So he came to council and signed on like a duplex or something. So now he's
yeah,
again,
emergency, not suspension rules.
his
of-
development.
You can only do that on
To be
council
bigger
board. You
lots,
can't
just to really go. It's less
So that's where you need a
than
Point is,
supermajority
you've
vote.
done your part.
Yes.
more land, less houses.
So the
You can't
wording,
even suggest
how
that.
can we get it on our
Total
agenda?
number of houses by
Can't.
Oh, your house.
No, I mean, we'll get an agenda that'll say suspend.
5 to 43.
For, on the
We've
floor.
seen it. And we see emergency.
That's really.
Without suspension.
Yeah, I don't think it was running.
It must be the market that he's thinking, like that type of house. It's probably good on a stormwater standpoint, less impact to the stormwater system. More green space,
I gotta
absorbs
run.
more water.
I gotta run and pick something up in there.
Administration and the public. We'll now call the Building and Lands Committee meeting to order. We'll take attendance. Councilman Miller.
Present.
We reduced the total number of houses by
No, I mean, we'll get an agenda that'll say suspend
5 to 43.
for on the floor. Of council. Mr. Carlson, before we do that,
Just point of
Take
clarification,
that vote.
the motion includes the two changes that
of course.
You love it.
Yeah.
Still getting used to it.
I think that's the way you guys got it.
Of council. Mr. Carlson, before we do that,
Just point of
Take
clarification,
that vote.
the motion includes the two changes that
Ms. Wasow, and we are going to vote on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
There you go, John. All those opposed? Adjourn, 7:48.
Is that your son who's the hockey player? Oh.
Yeah, still getting used to it.
I think that's the way you guys got it. Now it's better.
Okay, well then that's good. Let's try to provide you guys with something you can work with. My daughter loves it.